Prof. Frederico, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture, Prof. Brenda Schmahmann, Prof. Hamilton, who's going to be our respondent this evening. There's senior leaders, and there's members of Senate, many of you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is indeed a great honor and special privilege for me to welcome you to the Professorial Inaugural Lecture of Professor Brenda Schmahmann. I wish to express also a very warm welcome to all the family, friends of Professor Brenda. This is indeed a proud and joyful, yet a landmark moment for all of you, for Professor Schmahmann, and of course also for colleagues at UJ. Inaugurations, many a times pompous and decadent, but hopefully mostly dignified, well-meaning, we are told, date back to ancient Greece as the opportunity for the formal investiture of a person into high office. And it marks the formal assumption of office or position of authority. And so today is that day that marks the rites of passage and the entry of Professor Schmahmann into the distinguished community of university's most senior scholars. It is indeed an office and a position of authority and leadership, which we shall not assume lightly, but shall do so with considerable and ongoing thought, reflection, deliberation, and presence of mind. I am reminded that inaugurations usually follow well after the actual appointment to the role of post. I think, Brenda, you confirmed that you were appointed in 2013, March 2013. And are often a test and an indication as to whether the incumbent still finds the now somewhat older role or office as interesting as at the time of the interview. And so we shall observe Professor Schmahmann's tonight with more than an ordinary level of interest to see if that excitement is still present. I remarked earlier that the professorial inauguration is as important to the incumbent and their loved ones and colleagues as it is to the university. I say this since the inaugural lecture is as much a reflection on the state and the intent of the contemporary university and how it measures up to Professor Schmahmann's inaugural lecture on toppled statues and fallen icons, negotiating monuments to British Imperialism and Afrikaner nationalism at post-Apartheid universities. I think it's a very relevant topic in the times of higher education. I'm also reminded that very few books are available in decent bookstores on what it is to be a professor, and in particular, what the freedoms and duties of this most senior scholar of the university is. In this regard, I offer you the reflections of Bruce McFarlane, who in his book, Intellectual Leadership in Higher Education, Renewing the Role of the University Professor, seeks to correct this oversight and argues convincingly that given the corporatization of the research agenda, professors must reclaim professorial leadership and that they must thus occupy a very special role. Specifically, McFarlane argues that two freedoms, namely that of critic and advocate, are essential for professors to execute their four duties, being those of, first of all, mentor, secondly, guardian of standards, thirdly, enabler of networking and mobilizer of resources for others, and fourthly, ambassador for the institution or discipline. So this evening we will have only one small insight into how Brenda responds to this call for the return of professorial leadership. I'm now calling on Professor Freshy to just introduce the candidate in a few words, and thereafter she will address us. Thank you.
Thank you, Registrar. Very good evening to all of you, specifically to Professor Hamilton, our respondent, of course to Professor Brenda Schmahmann, to colleagues and guests from other universities. I see people from Wits, I see people from UNISA, I see people from Pretoria. Lovely to have you all here. Brenda joined the University of Johannesburg as a professor with a research specialization in March 2013. And as from the beginning of next year, 2016, she takes up the position of the NRF Saatchi Chair in South African Art and Visual Culture. It's a great honor and privilege for us in the Faculty of Art and Design and Architecture that she was awarded this Saatchi Chair. Professor Schmahmann has more than 3 decades of academic experience. She was Professor of Art History and Visual Culture at Rhodes University between 2002 until her move to UJ, a period that included a 7-year stint as Head of Fine Art. And she was formerly a staff member in the History of Art Department at the University of the Witwatersrand. And in fact, I took up her job when she left. She's a holder of a B rating by the NRF and winner of the Vice-Chancellor's Book Medal in 2007 at Rhodes University. She's also very active in research and in professional bodies. She's a former president of the South African Visual Arts Historians. She's a long-standing member of the Arts College of the African Studies Association, or ACASA, in the United States. She served an extended term on the NRF's panel for rating scholars in the performing and creative arts and is a member of the Standing Committee of Humanities of the Academy of Science of South Africa, or ASAF. Book review editor and editorial board member of the journal De Arte since the late 1990s, and on the advisory group of The Art Book, a journal published until 2011 by the Art History Association in the United Kingdom. She frequently acts as a scholarly reader for journals and publishers. Much of her scholarship is focused on gender and on exploring and analysing the works of women artists in mainstream contexts, as well as practitioners working in the context of community projects. She also has specialist interest in the politics of public art and thorny questions it raises about transformation. Editor of Material Matters, appliques by the Weya Women of Zimbabwe, and Needlework by South African Collectives, published by Wits University Press in 2000, and co-editor with Marion Arnold of Between Union and Liberation, Women Artists in South Africa, 1910 to 1994, published by Ashgate Publishing in the UK. Brenda is author of Through the Looking Glass, Representations of Self by South African Women Artists, published in 2000 by David Critt. Mapula, Embroidery and Empowerment in the Winterveld, also published by David Critt in 2006. And most recently of Picturing Change, Curating Visual Culture at Post-Apartheid Universities, published by Wits University Press in 2013. She's the co-editor of a special issue of African Arts on gender and South African art. That was in winter 2012. She has organised panels for a number of international conferences and is the international chair of the session on gender at the CIHA, or the International Committee of Art History, Congress, which is going to be held in Beijing in 2016. She has published numerous journal articles and book chapters and has curated 2 large-scale exhibitions which have travelled to museums across the country, each over the duration of a year. Brenda Schmahmann is recently co-edited with Kim Miller of Wheaton College in the United States, a volume on public art in South Africa, which is currently undergoing review with an international publisher. She's also busy working on a book on the Kieskama art project. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my great pleasure to invite Professor Brenda Schmahmann to the podium.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.